Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a vast, ancient landmass, one that's been hidden beneath the waves for millennia. This is Sundaland we're talking about, a crucial piece of geography that once connected much of Southeast Asia, but it's now mostly underwater.
It really is an immense area. Today, it's actually the world's largest Shulk Sea. But you have to picture it during the Pleistocene, the ice ages. Sea levels were dramatically lower then. So this whole landmass was exposed. It wasn't just land. It was a vital habitat and a key pathway for early human ancestors. We're talking particularly Homo erectus, making their way to places like Java.
Right, and here's where it gets, well, truly astounding. Scientists have just made this incredible discovery, not from some carefully planned dig, but totally by accident, during a huge port construction project of all things. They've unearthed the first ever human ancestor fossils from the submerged world. I mean, human remains found underwater. It's just wild.
That's an absolutely remarkable stroke of luck. I mean, studying these submerged areas is incredibly difficult. So a find like this, it's completely unprecedented for the Sunda Shelf.
Okay, so our mission today is to really dive deep into these incredible discoveries. We want to explore what these ancient skull fragments, these pieces of bone, can tell us about Homo erectus, about their lives in this, lost landscape, and crucially, why this finding really shifts our understanding of human history and migration in Eastern Asia. You're essentially getting a shortcut here to being right up to speed on some truly groundbreaking paleoanthropology. So maybe let's zoom out first, set the scene a bit more. Sundaland. Can you paint a picture? Just how vast was it, and why was it so critical for early humans like Homo erectus?
Yeah, think of it almost like a prehistoric continent, a huge land bridge. It emerged because those massive ice sheets during glacial periods locked up enormous amounts of water, dropping sea levels by, well, over 100 meters sometimes. So it stretched from mainland Southeast Asia, connecting islands we know today, Sumatra, Borneo, Java. And for hominins, it was this bustling ecosystem, a broad, relatively flat pathway that really helped them spread across the region. But like you said, because it's now mostly underwater, our understanding of who lived there has been, frankly, hampered. Huge gaps on the record.
Right, that submergence has been a major roadblock for finding fossils. We kind of knew it had to be important, but getting direct evidence from the shelf itself,
Very tricky.
which makes the origin of these fossils just mind-blowing. I mean, not a careful dig. These were pulled up during large-scale dredging back in 2014, 2015. There was this port company, Berlin Meinyacht Sagittara BMS, developing a massive artificial island, 100 hectares, for cargo handling, right there in the Madura Strait off the Java coast. And get this, they dredged over 5 million cubic meters of sand.
That's just an incredible volume of sediment. And what's really amazing is when they inspected the artificial island after dewatering it, researchers found it was literally strewn with vertebrate fossils, just lying there on the surface. They ended up collecting, what was it, 6,732 specimens. It just shows the potential, When these huge engineering projects happen in the right place, I can only imagine the surprise and the excitement for those researchers.
Absolutely, just wading through this unexpected fossil bounty. And among all that, two tiny but crucial hominin skull fragments. They're called Madura Strait 1, or MS1, that's a frontal bone piece, and Madura Strait 2, MS2, a parietal fragment. And it took a while to spot them. Dr. Harold Berghuis recognized MS1 in September 2018. MS2 was actually found earlier in 2015, wasn't identified as hominin until later during museum registration. Talk about a needle in a haystack. Or two needles.
Exactly. And the great thing is, the port construction itself actually helped with the dating. All the deep drilling and geotechnical studies they did allowed researchers to reconstruct this ancient submerged valley, part of the old Solo River system. This valley had cut into marine clay and was then filled with river sandstones, fluvial sandstones. That gave them a fantastic geological context.
Okay, so they had the context. How did they actually nail down the age of these incredibly rare fragments?
They use a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, dating. They took 2 samples of those fluvial sandstones. OSL basically tells you when the mineral grains in the sediment were last exposed to sunlight, so it dates the burial. The results came back as 162,000 years, plus or minus 31,000, and 119,000 years, plus or minus 27,000. This places the filling of that ancient river valley squarely within what we call marine isotope stage 6, MIS6. It's a key cold period, a glacial stage, and the subsequent warming towards MIS5. So most likely age range for the bones themselves, narrowing it down, is about 146 to 131,000 years ago, right in that penultimate glacial period.
Okay, but with finds like this, especially from dredging, there's always the question, could they have been washed in from somewhere else? reworked from older deposits. How confident are they that these fossils actually belong to that specific time and place?
That's a critical point, definitely. And Dr. Berghuis makes some strong arguments for them being in situ, basically, found where they were originally deposited. First, he points out that these big river valleys in a lowland coastal setting like Sundaland were mainly controlled by predictable sea level changes. Big swings. That's different from, say, inland Java sites where you have volcanoes and local tectonics muddying the waters, geologically speaking, making the layers harder to read.
So the Sundaland site gives a clearer, sort of less complicated geological story.
In a way, yes. It's driven primarily by those big sea level cycles. Second, the dredging itself only went down to about 32 meters below sea level, but the very bottom layers of the valley fill, the basal conglomerates, are much deeper, around 50 meters. They weren't touched, so the fossils couldn't have been churned up from significantly older, deeper deposits. And then there's the condition of the fossils themselves. They show a uniform state of mineralization, and they aren't heavily rounded or worn down. That suggests they weren't tumbled around and transported over long distances. It points to a more local origin, though that last point is maybe less decisive on its own.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, so let's picture this landscape 140,000 years ago during MIS6. What was Sundaland like then? What kind of environment were these Homo erectus living in?
Well, the climate during MIS6 in that region was actually relatively dry compared to today's tropics, and the vegetation reflected that. We're looking at more open conditions, probably grassland, maybe open woodland, not dense rainforest.
And the neighbors. What animals were sharing this landscape?
The animal fossils from the site are really impressive. A rich collection. You've got large bovids like ancient cattle and water buffalo busses, Paleosondiacus, and boobless paleocarabao, and elephant-like creatures, the Stegodon trigonocephalus. But what's really interesting is finding species like Duboisia, Sintang, a kind of antelope, and Epileptobos and Axisli decari types of deer and cattle. Because these were species previously thought to have vanished from Java earlier in the Middle Pleistocene, finding them here suggests they actually persisted on these exposed low land plains of Sundaland much later. It adds a new piece to that ecological puzzle. It also shows a difference from higher elevation Javan sites like Nandang, where these specific lowland species are notably absent.
All right, let's get to the hominin fossils themselves. MS1 and MS2. What do these skull fragments actually tell us? Let's start with MS1, the frontal bone piece. What does it look like?
Okay, MS1. It's a piece of the right side of the forehead, basically, about 45 by 33 millimeters. It preserves part of the brow ridge, the suborbital torus, and the base of the frontal squama, the main flat part of the forehead. It's heavily mineralized, quite dark, but the outer surface is pretty well preserved. They use CT scans to look inside, too. What's really key are the features. The brow ridge is relatively straight, not strongly arched. There's a flat area just above it, the supratoral plane. And crucially, there's very weak postorbital constriction. That's the narrowing of the skull right behind the eye sockets. These shapes are really diagnostic.
Okay, so how does that fingerprint compare? Where does MS1 fit in the hominin family album?
Well, the analysis shows it fits, and I quote, comfortably, with the group known as late Javanese Homo erectus. This is the population we know from sites like Ngandong, Sambung Makan, and Ngawi on Java itself, sometimes called the Ngandong Paleodeme, like a local group or population.
So definitely Homo erectus from this specific Javanese lineage. What are the specific similarities again?
It's that relatively straight brow ridge, the flat plane above it, and that very weak postorbital constriction. Now, it's particularly similar to the Sambung Makan skulls in having only modest thickening of the brow ridge towards the sides and that weak constriction. But MS1's brow ridge is actually comparatively thinner overall. This might mean it belonged to a more gracile, sort of slender adult, or maybe even an adolescent. It also has this slightly unique feature, a gentle but quite extensive supraorbital process, a part of the brow structure.
Interesting. Similar, but with its own little variations. How does it compare to other hominins? Say, earlier Javanese Homo erectus or the famous Hobbit Homo floresiensis, or even mainland Asian groups?
Good question. It clearly differs from the earlier Javanese Homo erectus, like those from Sangarin. They tend to have stronger postorbital constriction and more arched brows, and it's definitely not Homo floresiensis. MS1 isn't small or diminutive. Its brow is much thicker, the orbit and forehead wider, and the brow isn't arched like the hobbits. When you compare it to archaic Homo fossils from mainland Asia, say China, there are clear differences too, things like brow ridge thickness and shape, but especially that postorbital constriction. Most mainland Chinese fossils from that time show moderate to strong constriction. MS-1's is very weak, setting it apart.
Okay. And did the CT scans reveal anything interesting inside the bone?
Yes, they looked for the frontal sinus, the air cavity in the forehead bone. In the part of MS-1 that's preserved, there's no sinus present. This is actually consistent with what we see in late Japanese Homo erectus. They tend to have quite small sinuses, usually restricted just to the central part of the brow, so its absence here fits the pattern. Another tick for that group.
Right. Now, what about the other piece? Madura Strait 2, MS2, the parietal fragment. What can that tell us?
MS2 is smaller, about 45 by 34 millimeters. It's a piece from the side or top of the skull, including part of the sagittal suture, the seam running down the middle. Its main significance comes from its features suggesting youth. The suture isn't fully fused, it's open, and the bone itself is relatively thin. This strongly indicates it came from a subadult, someone not fully grown. While you can't assign it to a specific species just based on this piece, it does show what's described as an archaic character, specifically a modest curvature, which is typical of early human forms rather than modern humans.
Okay, let's pull this all together. What's the big picture implication here? This discovery seems to fundamentally redraw the map for Homo erectus, doesn't it? We knew this late Javanese group lived in the Solo River Valley, maybe 150, 200 kilometers upstream from where these fragments were found.
That's exactly right. This isn't just finding another fossil of a known group. It fundamentally rewrites their known world. This provides the first direct fossil evidence that these Homo erectus populations, living around 130, 140,000 years ago during MIS-6, weren't just stuck on Java. They were actively dispersing across these wider, exposed, lowland plains of Sundaland, probably following the course of big rivers like the ancient Solo.
So it really challenges that idea of the Javanese Homo erectus lineage being totally isolated, right?
Yes.
It suggests they had a much bigger playground, a much larger geographic range, especially during those glacial periods when Sundaland was dry land. And those big rivers must have been prime real estate water, attracting prey.
Precisely. It paints a picture of a more mobile, more widespread Homo erectus population than we perhaps assumed. It tells us these lowland environments, now underwater, were absolutely crucial corridors for their survival and movement.
Which leads to a really important question. If Homo erectus was moving across these lowlands, could other hominin groups from the Asian mainland have done the same? Maybe moving south during these periods? Does this hint at answers to other mysteries?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? We have these intriguing genetic clues, for instance. Genomic studies suggest there might have been a Denisovan population somewhere in Sundaland or Wallachia, the islands further east later in the Pleistocene, before modern humans arrived. But we lack the fossils. Actual physical evidence is missing. Now, MS-1 doesn't suddenly prove Denisovans were there, but it powerfully, as the paper puts it, underlines the potential of subsea hominin localities on the Sunda Shelf. It shows that fossils can be preserved and found there. The answers we're looking for about Denisovans, or maybe even other groups, could literally be at the bottom of the sea.
Which brings us right back to the challenge of finding them, like Dr. Berghuis points out. Finding more fossils on the seabed is incredibly difficult and expensive. It seems these big construction projects are almost the only feasible way right now. What does that mean for the future of this kind of research? How do scientists make sure these opportunities aren't just dredged up and lost?
Well, it really highlights the crucial need for collaboration, for paleontologists to build strong, ongoing relationships with industry, with port authorities, with marine construction companies, with dredging operators. Imagine having protocols in place, maybe archaeologists or paleontologists on call, or even embedded in some projects, so that when these large-scale disturbances of the seabed happen, there's a system to recognize, recover, and study any ancient materials that come up. These accidental archives, as you called them, discovered through modern engineering, could genuinely revolutionize our understanding. We need to be prepared to seize these moments.
So we've taken this deep dive today into a really incredible chapter of human history, and it was unearthed from, well, the most unexpected of places, beneath the busy waters of a modern port. It's just such a powerful reminder, isn't it, that major scientific breakthroughs can pop up where you least expect them. And this discovery, it really does change our map of Homo erectus life, their distribution. It underscores how much more there is to learn from our planet's hidden corners, its hidden archives.
Absolutely. The story of hominin evolution and dispersal in Southeast Asia is clearly far from complete. These submerged landscapes hold vital clues, and we've likely only, well, scratched the surface, or maybe dredged the surface in this case.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. How many more secrets about our ancient ancestors are out there? How many answers to big questions about human migration, about evolution, are lying hidden beneath the waves, just waiting? Waiting for maybe another construction project, another sharp-eyed researcher, another bit of luck to bring them to light.
Makes you wonder, what could you find if you started looking at everyday projects or even just the ground under your feet with a bit more curiosity?